So welcome back for another series of forums. Ian Quayle's with us today, and he's got any number of interesting topics to discuss. So thanks. I'll hand it over to Ian. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and a massive thank you to Stewart Title for sponsoring today's event. Lovely to see John, Liz, and Robert Kelly from Stewart Title all present today. Contact details for John and Elizabeth are on slide. If you are using Stewart Title with regard to defective title insurance, that's absolutely fantastic. Do have a look at their online solutions policies, and also do speak to John and Elizabeth, who I know are very keen to talk to practitioners to ensure that Stewart Title are providing the services that they require. In addition to that, Stewart Title can provide guidance and training with regard to compliance. So a massive thank you to John and to Liz and to Robert for coming along today. A massive thank you to Stewart Title for supporting today. Contact details on slide, and I think there's another slide. There you are with details about some of their product and their contact details shown on there. Topics for today. Well, what I thought we'd do is we'll have a nice sort of start to the year by having a look at AML, he said rather ironically. I then want to talk about attracting and retaining new business. And then I want to talk to you about AI and conveyancing. Two of the things that I want to mention, Stewart Title is sponsoring our Scottish conference, so I want to draw to your attention that event. And I also want to draw to your attention another event that Stewart Title is sponsoring, an event on the 23rd of October, which is a webinar on artificial intelligence, which links into what I was going to discuss today. But remember, this forum is your event. If there are any topics that you'd like us to explore, anything that you're encountering by way of difficulty or problem, let me know, put it in the chat, and either we can deal with it today or alternatively we can deal with it in connection with a future event. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was AML. And just to let you know what's happening, particularly in England and Wales, but also to an extent in Scotland, professional bodies are getting very jumpy about money laundering. And you are seeing firms being investigated with regard to their AML policies. And it's not just a question of having a policy, it's a question of applying the policy. And even though there's no loss, even though there's no actual evidence of money laundering, you are seeing firms being subject to professional misconduct in circumstances where they're not complying with their AML obligations. So I want to spend sort of 10-15 minutes just looking at this and just making sure that you as fee owners are aware of the obligations that are imposed on your firm and indeed imposed on you. So it's important that firms have a firm-wide risk assessment policy with regard to money laundering. It's also important that we look at clients and transactions and assess risk at the start and then monitor risk as the transaction progresses. A few things that I think are important. Of course, we've got to assess when we're looking at clients where they live and where they operate and be wary of high-risk jurisdictions. We've got to look at high-risk activities and businesses, and conveyancing is regarded as one of those. We've got to look at what our clients do to generate income and appreciate that where clients are involved in high cash-intensive businesses, then again, that immediately puts them at a higher risk with regard to AML risk assessments. And we've got to look at transactional risks as well, unusual transactions out of the ordinary transactions. To be honest, I think it's grossly unfair that the burden that's being imposed upon us by our professional bodies is so high. Yes, conveyancing is a conduit for money laundering, always has been and potentially always will be. And yes, criminal activity needs to be reduced or stamped out, however it is possible. But I think what's being imposed on us at the moment is too much. But I just want to draw to your attention one or two things. If anyone's interested, by the way, I've just done a course on money laundering, and I'm happy to share notes and slides. In it, I talk about the fact that as far as conveyancing is concerned, it is a high-risk service, and it's important that anyone dealing with conveyancing and conveyancing clients needs to be aware of firm policies, and that includes receptionists. It includes relatively junior members of staff, not just the fee earner that is supervising or having conduct of the file. We need to think about risk in connection with a number of different sectors. How we deliver our services. So are we delivering services to clients online, or are we meeting them face to face? When we're not meeting with clients, are we undertaking additional risk assessment, or are we putting policies in place that alleviate or mitigate against risk? What happens when we're acting via third parties? And I was just talking to someone recently who was quite interesting. Their client was a high net worth individual who couldn't be bothered to attend the conveyancer's office to discuss issues related to the transaction, and therefore sent their personal assistant for that purpose. And again, that got me thinking about, when we're acting via third parties, the additional risks that we're exposed to. And again, that can happen where we've got sort of elderly clients and we've got children acting as their proxy with regard to instructions, particularly with regard to communicating via email and the like. All of these things require caution. And therefore, we've got to think about delivery channels and the risks that we're exposed to as a consequence of that, and think about how we can eliminate risk. And to be honest, I think that's impossible, and how we can mitigate risk. And the important thing here is we have a policy, we apply the policy, and where we are identifying high risk, we put in place measures to ensure that that risk is minimized. That might involve a sort of another fee earner looking over the file, or assessing risk with the fee earner having conduct of the file as the transaction progresses. When we're dealing with clients that we don't meet, could we meet them? Should they always be assessed as higher risk when we're not meeting them? And should we perform enhanced due diligence? And I think the answer to those two latter questions is yes. When we talk about transactional risks, we need to look at the bigger picture as a firm. What sort of conveyancing work are we doing, and are we happy to do, and are we geared up to do? Second, if we're handing matters to individual fee earners, we should do a risk assessment to ensure that the fee earner and the transaction are properly matched. And then what we need to do is make sure that fee earners are undertaking their own risk assessment with regard to files. And this isn't a tick box exercise, unfortunately. It would involve the fee earner looking at the file, looking at the client, looking at the instruction, and assessing risk, and making a note either on the file or on a case management system as to what that assessment has concluded. And again, it would then involve reassessing risk as the transaction occurs. As far as that is concerned, some important points. The fee earner due diligence, the fee earner risk assessment with regard to AML is necessary for every client every time. So the fact that I've dealt with John Brown or Paul McIntosh in 14 transactions in the last 3 years is irrelevant to an extent. There has to be a risk assessment in connection with every matter. We need to be really careful where we've got a client that's already dealing with our firm, perhaps our private client, our commercial department, and then they're being referred to us for conveyancing work. Just because there is that pre-existing relationship with the client does not remove the need to do a risk assessment, and would not necessarily reduce the category of risk from high risk to medium or low risk. As far as client risk assessments are concerned, a few things. Of course, we're verifying identity. We're also looking at the client's relationship with the firm and history with the firm. And there's a few points that I want to share with you. You might have a client that has, on the last 6 years, instructed the firm on 3 occasions with regard to conveyancing transactions, but all of those conveyancing transactions have involved a specific type of property. I don't know, an investment property in Edinburgh. The acquisition of property in Stirling or a particular town or city. If we've got a transaction that's out of the norm, then we need to investigate why that is. So a client that's bought 3 buy-to-let flats in Edinburgh and the surrounding area and is now buying a property on the outskirts of Inverness or Aberdeen, we've got to ask why, or we've got to be able to justify on our file why this sort of out of the ordinary transaction is not sort of high risk or higher risk. So when we talk about relationship with the firm, it's not just a question of saying, well, we've acted for this client for a number of years. We've got to assess the types of transaction and assess whether or not this transaction is consistent with previous transactions. We've got to ascertain the purpose of the relationship. So what is the client asking us to do? Client objective, again, is so important. Knowing your client is important. And then, of course, we've got to look at sources of funds. And this is important. And again, I can't overemphasize this. This is a case of chasing down the money. So some examples recently that I've been involved with, a client that made their money as a sort of social influencer and also selling handbags on TikTok. I didn't realize that TikTok was a sort of a marketing opportunity. Evidently it is. Again, a firm instructed by this individual who is earning significant amounts of revenue via their social influencing and via this TikTok sort of market stall, didn't have any accounts, didn't have any way of independently verifying income, couldn't prove that they were paying tax on the income that was being generated, and the firm just said, look, we can't act. Another thing I've just dealt with is a client, and the client has asked the firm if it was possible to pay a deposit via cryptocurrency, and the firm said no. The client then said, well, if I convert my currency into sterling, can you act? And the firm said, well, no. And this is where there was a bit of a deep dive into the cryptocurrency issue. Point number one, the firm said, first of all, we've got to establish where the funds came from to enable you to invest in cryptocurrency. Number two, where the cryptocurrency has increased in value as a consequence of that investment, we need independent proof as to how it's increased in value. And number three, we have to be satisfied that the cryptocurrency product comes from a jurisdiction that's a safe jurisdiction. So where is the cryptocurrency based? And then finally, you have a cryptocurrency wallet. Where is the company that created that wallet based? And when I was talking to the firm, they were saying they'd done quite a lot of research with regard to cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency wallets. And they had done some research via the US State Department and had ascertained that there were some crypto wallets that had been created by companies with connections to North Korea and others that were connected to Russia. There were some cryptocurrencies that in fact were based in Russia and also based in, I think it was Venezuela. So with cryptocurrency, it's not just a question of where did the money come from to enable you to invest in cryptocurrency, it's the actual enhancement of value within the currency itself and jurisdictional issues with regard to where that cryptocurrency is based, and also if there's a crypto wallet where that entity is based. And again, there are jurisdictional issues. Put simply, again, in both those connections, firms were saying, well, it's not worth our while us acting. There are companies out there that will verify how cryptocurrency has increased in value. There's a firm of accountants in London that will do that. And there are some firms, predominantly in London, that will act for clients who are buying property, commercial or residential property, using cryptocurrency. I would say they're very brave. Some would say they're very foolish. Law Society, National Crime Agency all say, proceed with caution. In other words, we can't tell you not to, but we're recommending that you don't. I want to talk about sources of funds and this idea of chasing the money, but I also want to talk about sources of wealth. And there's one thing with AML that really sort of annoys me. And again, I think it's an unfair burden on solicitors and conveyancers. Verification of sources of wealth. If we're saying a client is a high-risk client or a transaction is high risk, then one of the things that's necessary to perform in those circumstances is not just sources of funds checks, but a source of wealth check. And I was talking to someone in the National Crime Agency about this, about what do we mean by sources of wealth, and what he said, which makes sense, does the transaction, does the amount of wealth that's required to undertake the transaction sit comfortably with your client's lifestyle? So in other words, if your client is a bus driver of 20 years standing, hasn't received any form of large inheritance, hasn't had any form of gambling win, well, would you expect that person to be purchasing a £5 million penthouse in London, or buying, I forget where, there was another property, I think it was in Poole in Dorset, Sandbanks, again, buying an £11 million property. The answer is, well, no, it doesn't stack. Now, that's a sort of an extreme example. There are other examples that are at the other end of the spectrum where, again, you've got a client doing something that may not appear to be extraordinary, but appears to be unusual. It's necessary to check and record decisions that you're making in that regard. Do be aware that a lot of professional bodies are now providing firms with red flags with regard to transactions, with regard to clients, with regard to matters that they're dealing with. Be aware of them and understand and appreciate that it's not a sort of definitive list. There could be other things with regard to the transaction that would render you on notice that this was unusual. The best example I can give you of that is that the client that tells you I've got 8 mobile telephones. Well, why on earth would anyone have 8 mobile telephones? I would be challenging and questioning that. Well, why? Well, if the answer is I have 8 legitimate businesses that I use, or 7 businesses and I have a personal mobile phone, well, perhaps that is understandable. But where there's no valid or legitimate reason for having 8 mobile telephones, that would be suspicious. And my parting gift on all of this is when it's necessary to report suspicious activity. And again, this is someone I was speaking to at the National Crime Agency. You're not reporting criminality, you're reporting suspicion. It's not your job to say that's criminal or this source of funds is from a criminal source. It's not your job to do that. It is your job to say, as part of my role as solicitor or conveyancer in this particular transaction, there is something suspicious about the transaction or about the client. And you are required to report to your compliance or money laundering reporting officer, who in turn is required to report to the National Crime Agency. It is for the National Crime Agency to determine criminality. And what I was told was the National Crime Agency is a conduit or a hub with regard to suspicious activity. And it might be the guy with the 8 mobile telephones that you've reported to the National Crime Agency as suspicious has no other sort of notification on his file or on their system. On the other hand, it may be that the HMRC has said that this person seems to have significant wealth and doesn't seem to be declaring it, or it may be that the relevant police force has reported to the National Crime Agency suspicious activity. That, in connection with what you're telling the National Crime Agency, may then trigger the National Crime Agency taking further action. Anyway, that's enough for me in talking about money laundering. But do be careful, as I say, law societies and professional bodies are coming into firms, having a look at policies, but then looking at application of policy. If you haven't got a policy, you're in big trouble. If you have a policy and it's not being applied properly, then you're probably in trouble, but not quite to the same extent. But I am seeing huge fines being dished out by professional bodies in England and Wales with regard to non-compliance with AML, and the likelihood is that that sort of fine or that sort of activity is likely to take place north of the border too. Okay, enough of that. Remember, if anyone's got anything to add with regard to AML, or anyone's got any topics that they'd like to discuss today, feel free to put those topics in the chat box. The next thing I want to talk about is attracting and retaining new business, conveyancing clients. Talking to people this morning, I think everyone's really busy. So a lot of you might be thinking, well, hang on, Ian, we don't need business. It's always worth thinking about how we attract business, or attracting more or better business. So when we talk about attracting business, what do we do? I think the first thing and the most important thing from a marketing perspective is to take a step back and look at your current client base. Who are they and why do they come to your firm? I think it's a very dangerous step in any marketplace to say we're going to start attracting clients that aren't our sort of traditional client. So where we're looking at rapid expansion, where we're looking at attracting new types of client, A, are we geared up to it? B, do we actually want it? And C, do we have the resources to manage it and to supply it? Far better, in my view, to look at our existing client base and say, what can we do to get more of the same? For three reasons. One, we've already got systems and processes that clearly work for that type of client. Number two, we're not going to have to throw huge amounts of money at new systems and processes to attract more. We can sort of grow slowly and organically with our existing clients. And three, from a claims perspective and a complaints perspective, if we're dealing with a certain type of client and looking for more of the same, there's less risk and less vulnerability. So how do we attract more of the same type of client? Well, we ask ourselves, why did our existing client base come to us? And we start marketing that and start marketing it more. Where we're looking at really expanding rapidly, there are a number of tricks. One of the things I've always done when I've been in practice as a conveyancer is thought to myself, what can I do to attract new business? And then what can others do to attract new business from me? And I've always worked on the principle of finding 3 people who are active in the marketplace that can generate business for me. Now, over the years, those people have been mortgage brokers, those people have been estate agents, those people have been accountants, but also there's some others that you think, well, you know, that's unlikely to generate business. But I always remember once, hairdressers, a local hairdresser that I knew used to send boatloads and boatloads of work to us as a firm, just because of a connection, just because of sort of friendliness, as it were. But no referral fees, no sort of competition from anyone else, no pressure. So there are people out there that can refer work to you. I remember we also had a chairman of a citizens advice bureau. We used to do some free sort of consultations for the Citizens Advice Bureau in a particular town. But this particular person, who was a member of a Rotary Club and a member of Round Table and all sorts of different bodies, he used to send boatloads of work to us as well. What about estate agents and talking to estate agents or mortgage brokers, etc.? Often they're tied up. But just talking to them and saying, look, we know that you've already got connections, etc. But there might be times where there's a conflict. There might be a time when a firm can't do a particular job. Just bear us in mind in connection with any work that you've got out there. I always look at existing clients and think these are a fantastic resource for attracting new work. I know you're busy, and I know this might sound ridiculous, but I tell you what works every time. Thinking about contacting existing clients or former clients and providing them with news. It may be good news, the fact the firm's expanding, the fact that John and Mary have made big partners or have finished their traineeship or whatever it might be. But just contacting existing clients and telling them about what the firm is up to is useful. Number 2, providing clients with information, sort of free information about issues. And I was just noticing on the Law Society of Scotland's website, there was an article, I think, aimed at clients in connection with boundaries. Has everyone seen that? So if I was practicing in Scotland and looking for work, I would probably send that out to clients and just remind them, hey, look, if you have or encounter boundary problems, this is the position with regard to the law. I've never ever asked clients to refer other clients. I wouldn't do that. I think that's a step too far. But telling clients about who we are and what we're doing and giving clients additional information or an update or issues with regard to what the market's like or this sort of thing, I think can be useful. Next tip, and again, I've got so much credit for this over the years when I've done consultancy work for firms. Have a look at clients that you haven't heard of or heard from and go back 2 years and backwards and think of a reason for contacting them. And again, this could be tied into what I've just mentioned, a newsletter or some news about the firm, etc. And just indicate on there, the points of contact with regard to your firm to see if new work can be sent to you. That works so well. Often it might not be the individual you're communicating with, but it might be, well, I've got a son or a daughter that's buying a flat, or I've got a neighbour, or a friend that's just about to sell or just about to buy a property. So that sort of thing can work wonders. Encouraging members of staff to develop connections and develop work can again work. So at one stage, I was in charge of a residential conveyancing team, and I asked everyone in that team, for the most senior member of staff to the most junior member of staff, to do what I did, and again, find 3 people that potentially could attract business for us. Just 3, and then the task is you look after those 3. And then if you're organising events at the firm, drinks evening, drinks reception, a day at the races, whatever it might be, everyone has 3 contacts that's referring work to us that can be invited along. And again, I would say even the most junior members of staff should be encouraged to do that. Leads me on to another question. Where that happens, where members of staff are getting work referred to them, courtesy of their own connections, is it right that that fee earner then deals with the transaction that is generated as a result of that connection? And this is where it can get quite interesting. My view is that wherever possible, that should be the case. So where there is a personal connection between the introducer and the fee earner, then that fee earner should deal with that introducer. 2 things, however. One, I don't want introducers to be sort of tied to an individual fee earner. A, because I worry in case that fee earner decides to leave, and B, there are other issues from a sort of security perspective that worry me. So I would always want work that's coming in to be coming in to the firm and then allocated back to the fee earner, but with some form of check or balance with regard to that work. And introducing the introducer to other members of the firm, so there isn't just simply one point of contact. Again, I think that's good and sensible practice. Other things that I think generate work, writing articles in newspapers or online, again, that are of sort of general interest, that can work. Supporting charities, supporting public groups, public bodies in an area, again, a very cheap way of generating business and attracting new business. And the last thing I would say about attracting business is to talk to colleagues. So, you may have a private client team, a criminal team, all manner of different teams within the firm. Again, it's important that there is a sort of cross-party transmission of information and transmission of clients. All of those things work. Client retention, retaining business. Again, I always say to firms, it's far easier to retain existing clients than to try and attract new ones. So with regards to retaining clients, golden rule number 1, do the simple things well. So under promise and over deliver wherever possible. Number 2, when you're concluding a conveyancing file, give something to the client that enables the client to remember you. And that might be a lovely email to the client saying, thank you very much for your kind instructions. Remember to be aware of this, remember to be aware of that, or whatever it may be. Indicating to the client what steps they need to do to prevent boundary problems or this sort of thing. And just referring the client to the fact that, you're there to help them in the future with regard to conveyancing transactions, and refer to them other parts of the firm that may also be able to offer those services. I think this last communication with the client is so important. There are some firms that I know that will give the client something at the end of the relationship. That might be an information sheet about issues that could arise relating to the property. So issues associated with remortgage, issues associated with disputes or problems with neighbours, responsibility for boundary walls and fences, this sort of thing. I know some firms that give clients things like a key ring or something at the end of the transaction, just with the firm's name on it. You can be as tacky as you want. You need to have something when the relationship ends for the client to remember you by. Retaining new business is so important. The last thing to say before I move on to talk about artificial intelligence are fees. Again, I don't think it's the same problem in Scotland as it is in England, but in England, you get firms that are bottom feeders. In other words, they will try and win business on the basis of low fees. And I always discourage it for three reasons. One, you're attracting the wrong type of client. You're attracting clients who don't regard the transaction as important. They regard the transaction as a consumer transaction that needs to be undertaken at the lowest cost possible. Number two, you're not going to build brand loyalty when attracting clients, particularly via the internet, with low fees. All you're doing is encouraging them to go on the internet to find firms who are silly enough to offer reduced fees. And the last point is, again, as far as loyalty is concerned, the client, if they do come back to you, is not going to come back to you and expect you to charge a lot higher fee. You've told them, you've set the bar at the existing or original fee. So a year later, you can't say to the client, well, I acted for you in connection with that purchase at a special discounted rate. We've now got a sale and purchase. And yes, unfortunately, I'm charging you double that rate. It just doesn't wash. If you've charged a low fee, it's very difficult then to justify increases in fees at a later date. I remember doing some work for a firm that didn't have a residential conveyancing team, so they were starting one from scratch. And when I went to see them and talked to the head of the conveyancing team and the firm's senior partner, they said the only way that we're going to attract business is if we undercut all our competition. And I said, well, if you do that, yes, you'll get work, but you won't get the right sort of work. And you're going to create problems for yourselves. Within 2 years, that department had closed down. It was uneconomic. They were attracting clients that were a nightmare. Their reviews page on all the appropriate review websites was a war zone. And in the end, they decided, look, it's just not worth doing. So watch out for attracting and retaining new business. Again, if anyone wants some notes, I've got some notes about sort of good practice with looking after clients that might be of use to you. Again, anyone got any comments or anything they want to put in the chat? If you have, just put them in for me, please. If not, I'm going to talk about AI. And John was mentioning, the summer break. Over the summer, I was lucky enough to attend a conference, and Robert Kelly was there at the conference, and there was a guy there called Nigel Clayton. Nigel Clayton is a barrister who specializes really in chancery work or landlord disputes, and specializes in boundary disputes. So Nigel's always an interesting guy, a really nice guy, very, very knowledgeable about dealing with boundaries. And he and I were talking, and we were discussing retirement. And I was saying to Nigel, talking about AI, and saying to Nigel, look, yes, it's on us. Yes, it's going to have a part to play. But luckily, if we're getting out and hanging up our boots in the next 5 to 10 years, we might just escape it really sort of being a major issue in our professional careers. And Nigel looked at me and laughed, and he said, you've got it wrong. Nigel sits as a part-time judge. And he said that the Judicial Studies Board had got a guy called Professor Richard Susskind, to talk to the judiciary about what artificial intelligence can do. And Nigel was saying, current artificial intelligence is simply trawling the internet and pulling in what it thinks is relevant information, putting it in some form of perceived order, and then saying, there you go. What is now being explored and being created and being modified is artificial general intelligence. And artificial general intelligence is the equivalent of human thinking. And the Judicial Studies Board was told by Richard Susskind, shortly, artificial intelligence will be able to assist judges in deciding court cases. To be honest, he said that artificial intelligence could probably do a better job than a human judge, but society would be unhappy with artificial intelligence acting as a judge. And therefore, what we're likely to see short to medium term is artificial intelligence aiding and assisting judges. But at some point in the future, the concept of court cases is going to change quite radically. And we are going to have artificial intelligence supporting the judiciary, supporting the parties. And Richard's view is the idea of the traditional courthouse or the old court in a city centre or town centre will disappear. And there's no reason why court cases can't be held, can't be dealt with online. Point number one. Point number two. Nigel was telling me that, again, Richard has looked at the medical profession and said that at the moment, artificial intelligence is used for diagnosing and spotting things like scans, etc., and does a far better job than the human being could do. That artificial intelligence is used in robotics, etc., relating to surgery. But next level artificial intelligence is proactive rather than reactive. And what it'll do is it'll come up with diet plans for individuals to ensure that diseases that they're susceptible to don't occur or don't cause problems. So he's of the view that the artificial intelligence is going to change radically. Nigel said that the other point was that Richard Susskind's view was that artificial intelligence will change everyone's working environment, how they work and what they do. But it won't mean that we don't need lawyers anymore and that we don't need judges anymore. And the example that was given in this presentation to the Judicial Studies Board was artificial intelligence has created a pop group. Artificial intelligence has created music that imaginary pop group plays. And people will watch that artificial intelligence group and be mesmerized by its ability and by the tunes they will play. But that group will not replace Coldplay or whoever else might be your sort of musical choice. Because as human beings, part of our enjoyment of music is looking at live musicians playing drums or playing guitars, or thinking to ourselves, someone has written those vocals, or someone is now performing those vocals. And the artificial intelligence group, although marvelous and fantastic, doesn't have that physical, unhuman sort of connection. And Richard's view is exactly the same principle applies across the board in every sort of field that you could imagine. And yes, artificial intelligence is going to particularly impact the professions and the legal profession in particular, but it's not going to mean lawyers aren't necessary anymore. So Nigel tells me all about that, and he says, Ian, really, we've got to get on board with artificial intelligence and get on board quick. So that day I ordered online every book I could find written by Richard Susskind. Got one here, Tomorrow's Lawyer, An Introduction to the Future. This was written for prospective lawyers, saying to them, you need to make sure that you're working for law firms that understand what artificial intelligence is, because the existing training regime and the existing work for lawyers is not going to be what you're going to encounter when you qualify. He's also written other books on artificial intelligence and law. I've read the lot now. Anyway, as a consequence of all of that, I contacted Professor Richard Susskind and I said to him, look, I'm really interested in how everything that you have said and everything you've written about impacts on conveyancing. What he has done so far is looked at the big commercial firms and looked at how artificial intelligence impacts on them. So, for example, he says it's no longer necessary to recruit trainee commercial lawyers to go through share sale agreements or to go through warranties, etc. AI can do that for you. What you need are people that are trained and experienced that can relate all of that to clients or that can spot potential issues or problems. So he says there's a training gap for commercial lawyers. We don't want trainees, we don't want junior commercial fee earners. We want experienced people that can hold clients' hands. And so what I've said to him is, well, look, I want you to do exactly the same exercise for conveyancers. And what we're doing, and I think it's on the 23rd of October, if anyone's interested, we're having a webinar where he's going to discuss exactly those issues for conveyancing and to see how AI will impact on conveyancing. One of the things that he says in one of his books is that with regard to smaller law firms, he sees AI being used to enable law firms to collaborate. So instead of every firm creating their own form of retainer or engagement letter, or their own form of report for clients, or their own advice to clients about co-ownership, about boundaries, etc., what he sees is some form of collaboration, some form of center, some form of hub that does that and shares the knowledge and skills of all the relevant firms and produces the perfect, or as near as you can get, to the perfect retainer, or the perfect explanation about boundary issues for conveyancers. So if anyone's interested, as I say, on the 23rd of October at 2 o'clock, there's a webinar with myself and Richard where he will be sharing directly with the profession his views with regard to conveyancing. I would commend you to attend. He's a really interesting guy. He's not scary. He's not saying, look, we're doomed. He's not saying artificial intelligence is going to take over the earth and therefore we need to worry. He's saying we've got to change. And certainly my experience with him, my meetings with him, I think he's a really fascinating guy, and he's going to give you an insight as to where we're going and what we're doing. So be aware of that. The other thing that I wanted to share with you, and I'll just do this if I can, our conference, 30th of October, Doubletree by Hilton, Strathclyde, Phoenix Crescent, Strathclyde and Bells Hill. Everyone's welcome. Contact details on there. We've got some great speakers and some really interesting discussions and topics, sponsored by Stewart Title, so a massive thank you to that. And then we've also for that, and then we've also got forum, which I mentioned earlier, and there it is, some details about that, which you're welcome to come to as well. Conscious of time, and I'm conscious that no one's put anything in the chat yet with regard to topics.
We do. Sorry, Ian, it's Robert. Yeah. We do have a question, actually, if you want to look at the chat from Charlotte about AI, which is quite interesting on the topics you've been talking about.
All right, thank you. I'll have a look at it and see if I can find it. Yeah. Sorry about that. Charlotte, thank you. Yeah. Well, the thing is that, Charlotte, when you look at artificial general intelligence, it's not a probability machine. And again, it's sort of moving on. So if you look at ChatGPT, there's a ChatGPT version 7, and it's sort of radically different to what we're seeing. I'm not saying that what we're currently using is the end article. I don't think it is. It has its faults, it has its problems. And a computer making decisions, yeah, I agree. Currently, ChatGPT is not sophisticated enough to be able to do it, but there are versions of it that are becoming more and more able to do it. So how would you say that someone has a reasonable judgment from a probability machine? I'm not saying that at all, and I agree with you. You can't. And again, how can you have trial by peers if it's an algorithm? Again, I think there are some moral issues relating to that. And yeah, I mean, I don't know whether you've seen this, Charlotte, but again, there's barristers being criticised for using ChatGPT to create skeleton arguments, and ChatGPT is inventing cases. And it is, but I would liken this to sort of the railways and Stephenson's rocket. First, if you look at Stephenson's rocket, the first sort of steam engine, how unsophisticated was it, and how quickly did the modern steam train and then the modern train develop and evolve? And the thing now is that technology is so sophisticated that the technology is moving far more quickly. So yeah, you're right. It has to be watched. We have to be cautious in its approach. And I'm not saying it is a panacea and a magic fix, because it isn't. But I am saying somewhere down the road, we're going to see something that's radically different to what we've got. And if the judiciary are looking at it and the government is training the judiciary on what AI can do, then I would have said the judiciary is the most conservative with a small c of just about any institution you could mention. And they're looking at it and thinking, how can this work and what can we do? So, Charlotte, I'm not saying what we've currently got enables all of these things to happen. I think what's coming down the road is what's going to happen. And again, just as with electronic reports on title, just as the ability of migrating data from one database to another is helpful and useful, it still needs a lawyer to check it. At the moment, the amount of checking that needs to be done probably devalues the resource that's being available. All I'm saying is that what we've got down the line is far more sophisticated systems. That means that need to check and those basic errors that are being made by AI will slowly but surely be eliminated. I'm not saying they're going to be totally eliminated, and I'm not saying that they're going to take over the world. They're not. And when you listen to Richard, and when I first started listening to him, I thought this is what he's going to say. It's going to be gloom and doom, and it's going to be we don't need conveyancers anymore. He's not saying that at all. He's saying even when we see 7th generation ChatGPT, even where we see artificial general intelligence at its finest, we're still going to need lawyers. But what we're going to do is we're going to need different types of lawyer. The lawyer the lawyer that's a technologist that can check that what the artificial intelligence doing is correct and can validate it, and the lawyer that's able to say to the client, this is what artificial intelligence has generated, this is my take on it, we can rely on it, or we can't rely on it, we need to do further checks and we need to undertake further investigation. So it's really interesting. But Charlotte, I really understand your view. And yeah, again, computers making decisions, that's never going to work. But I don't think it's a computer as we know it making decisions when you look at the artificial general intelligence, which is what Richard's talking about. But Charlotte, certainly at the thing on 23rd of October, Richard will take questions such as this and will provide you with a view. And he's far more able and far more qualified and far more experienced than me. But thanks very much for that. Anyone else got any views about AI? Anyone using electronic reporting on title, for example? Anyone migrating data from searches into reports at the moment? Certainly a lot of firms in England are doing that and buying into systems that enable that. And I've been doing some work with some of them. And one of the things I say is, if you're going to migrate data from a search into a report, for a lawyer to be comfortable to do that, AI must show you the source document. So I was just looking at this last week for someone, I think it was a mining search, and AI had enabled data from the mining search to be extracted and put into a report to a client. But the AI system had the mining search up on screen, so the lawyer could look and check that what AI was saying in the report to the client was consistent with what was revealed in the report itself. So it's that sort of exercise we're seeing at the moment. As I read it, artificial general intelligence is sort of way beyond that. But it is, and certainly from a client's perspective, the client will always want you to hold their hand and to be able to tell them, just what this means, or to check that the information that's being produced is correct. I think AI is going to create problems for professional bodies. It already is. To what extent do firms have to check when they're using AI that AI has got it right? There's a jurisdictional issue at the moment, in that where is the artificial intelligence source based? If it's based in the US, are there not issues with regard to resourcing data and safekeeping of data? So that's another issue. David, we are trialing it for a report. I'm not personally involved in the trial, but yeah, I think it does. And David, thanks for that, David, by the way. What I've seen, the AI for reports of title I've seen, is that the AI has the source document. So you actually see what it's used to compile the report, and it requires the lawyer to sign it off. So that section dealing with mining, you as a lawyer look at the source document, look at what AI has said, and you sign it off, or you can amend it, or you can just accept it as it is. So again, I couldn't see any lawyer currently just accepting a report on title that's been produced by AI without looking at the data in its sort of original source and checking that what we've got is correct. So, David, with regard to your trial, when's it likely to end, you know? And again, just so that you know, we're looking at a project at the moment for training lawyers, in the next few weeks. I think it's the University of Strathclyde has created a sort of an AI town or a virtual town, and is training some of their lawyers in personal injury and criminal work, where the lawyer is actually seeing virtual clients and giving advice. And again, that's something we're looking at from a property perspective. You know, it's all well and good telling a student or a trainee or a paralegal about an area of law, but how does that apply to the client? What happens if the client doesn't understand? What happens if you've got clients who are at odds with one another with regard to what they want to do? This sort of thing. So AI is certainly going to be used in the context of training, and it's certainly going to have a part to play in all of our lives, fortunately or unfortunately. Again, Robert, just a sort of a curveball. Anything Stewart Title's doing with regard to AI at the moment? Because I know you're sort of American-based.
We do, as is always the way with larger companies around America, set up a working party to look at, because a lot of the things you're talking about there potentially are of interest to insurers. Underwriters spend a lot of time going through documents, particularly on development situations. There must be an application for it there. So yes, it's something which I think you're right, we can't avoid and can't ignore. And it is, I suppose, just accepting that giving it to AI is that much different than giving it to a newly qualified lawyer or somebody who's not experienced. Someone who's taking their seat in conveyancing may actually come in with no experience at all. Whilst it causes me as an old man some concerns, I can see that actually the issues aren't much different to those we've been dealing with ever since we got beyond just being a one-man band doing all the work yourself.
And it is a tool. It's not replacing the lawyer. It's a tool. You know, even as far as the judiciary is concerned, currently it is an aid to the judge. It's not replacing the judge. I think that's how I see it. But they do see down the line that possibility. And again, where Richard comes from is quite interesting. He's saying, look, at the moment, the law doesn't work because it's so expensive. If AI can be used to reduce the amount of costs involved in litigation, that will surely mean that the law is more accessible. And even though there are issues and problems with AI, the fact that it enables the law to be more accessible is a good thing. So again, as I say, this guy is sort of not warning of doom, but in fact is saying, we need to embrace it. I wasn't prepared to embrace it prior to my chat with Nigel that day. I'm now of the view that you've got to look at it. You've got to think to yourself how it can help. But at the same time, I think you've got to adopt Charlotte's approach to say, let's just be cautious. And I think that the professional bodies are saying that, and common sense suggests that that's an approach to adopt. David, when your trial is concluded, it'd be lovely if you could come along and tell us your views, or get a colleague of yours to tell us a view. And Charlotte, again, if you've got any more sort of to add with regard to that, I'd be interested. I don't know whether I know the Law Society for Scotland has a sort of technology committee, doesn't it? But I don't know how far down the line they've got. in connection with looking at AI and what it can do. But anyway, what I would like to do is, first of all, just repeat the fact that we have this conference and invite you all along to that if you would like to come, and to invite you along to the webinar that I've just mentioned. So the conference details again are on there, and registration details are on there as well. To thank everyone for coming along today. Topics for next time. Anyone got any burning issues, any practice issues? There's been quite a bit of case law that I want to look at, so we'll do that on the next occasion. But remember, the idea of these events is that they're your events. So anything that you'd like to explore or to consider, let me know or let Robert know, and we'll happily incorporate your plans or your wishes. If you have any requests for title insurance, do speak to John or Liz or Robert, who will assist in connection with your requirements. If you need compliance training with regard to defective title insurance products, and again, Robert and the team will gladly assist you in that connection. And all that's left for me to do is, thank you all very much for coming along today. Thank you for your time. Again, I was talking to someone earlier today. Everyone's really, really busy. It's crazy. And I don't see it getting any less busy, unfortunately, at the moment. So it's a case of heads down, isn't it? But Robert, unless you've got anything to say, or anyone has got any comments in the chat, I want to finish at that. John, thank you. Liz, thank you. Everyone, thank you for coming along. Remember next time to come along as well. Remember these dates and put them in the diary. And again, any topics, any issues for the next occasion, let me know and we'll ensure that we talk about it. But in the meantime, thanks for coming along today and speak soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.